Hi, in this tutorial, we're going to create an expense tracker app, and I'm just going to kind of like run through the process of how you would simplify and create an application. To begin with, what we're going to do is set the goals for the application. So what I've listed over here are some goals for the expense tracker app, which I'm going to create. And as you can see, some of the things which I'm going to highlight out here is we would want the user to basically track and manage the expenses. Uh, they provide a feature for them to add, review, and edit the expenses, an option to categorize the expenses, and also define the payment methods for each type of expense, right? The other things which I would like to add to this tracker would be, say, allow users to upload the associated invoice images for each expense, provide some visualization of charts so that they can easily understand and consume that information, and offer some search functionality for easy access. All right. So this is the list of goals what we have. What I'm going to do is I've just created a small user flow to easily understand how I'm going to lay this out in the Frontly application. So, so the user would log in. Once the user logs in, this is the default feature on all Frontly apps, you have a user login. The other thing which I've highlighted over here, which we're going to use throughout the application, is this property called user ID. It's a unique ID which gets associated with every user account, which gets added to Frontly. So we're going to leverage this in almost all the pages. So that's why I just highlighted this out here. But like I said, this being a user flow, once the user logs in, they have like three flows to go by. One is an option to create a new expense. This is going to be a form which we're going to create in Frontly. And the second one is going to be a table listing of all the expenses they have created so far, with an option to basically edit any existing expense, and that's going to be our view slash edit selected expense screen. Apart from that, this being more of the edit screens and creation screens, there is also kind of like analyzing screen where you're basically reviewing various expenses. It allows you to individually, what do you call, view a specific expense, provide some forms of charts so that the user can understand what the data is and make sense of the data, and also do a search functionality on the specific screen. So they can search for a specific invoice or an expense if they know what they're looking for. Right? So that's a simple user flow. Apart from that, what I wanted to do is let's just, yeah, I think I'm just going to show the table what we're going to create. So this is a pretty straightforward table. Not a lot of columns out here. What I wanted to focus on was I've tried to keep it simple. Even though the application is simple, it covers a lot of aspects of Frontly. So there's a lot to learn. So this video might go a little long. And if it does, I'll just split it into two videos. So what I wanted to show you was this is going to be our uh, Excel sheet data. And if you can see, what I've created here is a category column, a payment column, an amount column, the description for that specific transaction, the date when the transaction happened, and then an invoice image associated with that specific transaction. You see that what I've done out here is highlighted the specific column, which is in red, just to highlight this specific column because these are unique identifiers which are associated with the individual users. So like I mentioned, each user, when you create an individual user in Frontly, they get a user ID, and that user ID is filled in this table so that uh, the user who's logged into their version of Frontly can only see their data and can only update their data. and they won't be able to see someone else's data. So say if the user had a user ID of 1000, they would not be able to see 2000, the user ID with 2000 data. They could only see these two rows and not this one, right? So what we're going to do is let's just get into the back end of Frontly. Let me switch into the back end. And what I've done here is I've already just created a new Frontly app. It's a blank slate. All I've done is create a new Frontly app. That's it. What apart from that, what I've done is I've just created two users. Uh, why I wanted to show you this was if you click on it, you'll notice that after you create your individual user who's going to use this system, you will see that it's got a unique identifier called user ID. And this is the user ID for this specific user. This is the user ID for this specific user. And that information we're going to use in the Frontly application to kind of like create the different types of pages and allow the user to only edit their content and not someone else's content. Okay. So basically the Excel sheet is going to contain all the content for all the users, different type of users who you add to the system. It's just that they will not be able to see, a specific user will not be able to see someone else's content. And that's the purpose of using that user ID. And I'll show you how to do that. All right. The other thing which I wanted to show is let's quickly go into, say, the settings. What I've done here is I've basically just given this application a name of expenses app. And if you want to learn about the branding, you can look at my other video, which contains information on how to change the branding of your application. So I've already used the same branding, so we don't have to go into that. And now what we can do, you can just look at pages. If you can see by default, Frontly creates this login page. So if you log in now, you're not going to see anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the first page. But before that, I have to associate my Google Sheet to the application. So let me go into Google Sheets, say import spreadsheet. I have my spreadsheet URL, do an import, and it creates, I just have one sheet in there called expenses, and that gets added out here. Let me quickly show you some of the content on the expense sheet, which I am actually adding to this. Here. If you see here, I have created a sample sheet, which the main reason for that being we have some data to begin with instead of feeding all this information. Because what we're going to do with categories and payments is these are defined content or defined options, which we don't want the user to add. We want the user to select. And that's why I've defined these categories and I've defined these payment methods. So they can make a selection, they just cannot add because it doesn't make sense to have categories which we don't want defined in the application. Apart from that, we just have some sample data. Like I said, the user ID to identify which user has filled in information, the amount, the description about that specific transaction, the date when the transaction happened, and the invoice image associated with that transaction. All right, so let's go back to the Frontly backend. What we're going to do is go into pages, and we're going to create a new page. And we choose new page and say create from scratch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this create an expense. Create expense. So that automatically creates a page URL of create expense, say create page, and we get into the page out here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a simple block. I'm going to add browse blocks, and I'm going to say create a form. Okay. Now under this, I'm going to choose my expense sheet, and I'm going to say I'm going to create, since this is a creation, I'm going to say create, and I'm going to change this to a grid layout. Actually, I would prefer to have a better layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this into another layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose another block. So choose, should be something called a layout over there. There it is. All right. So I can click on one and then choose this existing block, and it gets moved over there. Let's just change the casing on this. So we call this, so this is a create expense. So we'll call this create expense. This, right? And we have this page, or we have this block created. We have to make a few modifications in terms of what type of content we want on here. But before we do that, let me just change the submit button, because I don't want save new record. I want to say save expense. So let's say save expense, right? That's good. And it's going to be created. And this looks good. So what I'm going to do is, like I said, we don't want the user to insert a user ID. The application is supposed to handle it so that the user doesn't have to worry about their user ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this a hidden field. Click on user ID, choose hidden, and for the hidden value, because we want it to be dynamically populated so that when the user fills in all the other details and saves it, his or her associated ID gets associated with that record and gets stored in the spreadsheet. So I'm going to click on this and I say user, because this is at the user level, and we choose user ID. All right, I think we're good there. We can close that. Under category, remember we had filled in predefined set of values in the sheet, and that's why I filled this value so that I can just pull this up and choose select. So it'll automatically pull all the various kinds of categories and list them out here. You could manually go and add, but I thought it's much easier to just use the ones which are already in the Excel sheet. That's why I pre-filled the values there. All right, so let's go back. And the other thing is the payment method. We'll have to change that to select to, because they are also predefined set of payment methods. So we can choose that. And then we have amount. Now amount, we're going to leave it as input. We might have to only change this to numeric or number. So let's just change it to number. And in the description, what I'm going to say is please only add numbers. Do not use symbols like dollar. The reason being, validation will not take the dollar symbol, and we want to make sure that the user is inserting a number, and that's the reason why we are not going to take what you call, we're going to let the user know that dollar symbol or any other symbol for that matter is not allowed. All right, just that we don't have a validation to check for a dollar symbol right now. All right, so let's go to description. Now description, it's likely that the description might be large. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose text area. So it's going to be a larger area where the user can fill in more information. You can leave that as that. Invoice image, we can select that, and we can choose image field, because what the user is going to upload is going to be an image. That's good. Frontly ID we can ignore. So we have create expense, we have category, payment method, amount, description, date, invoice, save expense. Let me just quickly check that the user ID has been added, save page. And what I'm going to do is now switch to the user view. So in the user view, what we're going to do is we're just going to log in as, say, uh, as this specific user. That, and you can see a new page has been created, and we are by default we load into the create expense page, and you can see the create expense page is in this specific layout. And what we're going to do is let's just create a specific expense. So I am going to choose, say, insurance, and I'm going to say paid with credit card, amount of $55.50. Say paid insurance. Um, and oh, I forgot to define the date field. Let me go back and change that. So let me go back to the backend and make sure on the date you choose date. That makes it easier for the user to just select this. Let's close that, save the changes. Let's go back to the user view. Let's refresh this again. Choose insurance again. Choose credit card. $60.60. Well, let's make it 50 cents. 50 cents, and say uh, insurance. Okay. Choose the date when you made the payment. So that was, say, and then you can choose an image. I already have a couple of images which I have in my back end in the assets panel. I can choose that or upload an image, but I'm just going to use an existing image because I already have uploaded a few. Select web address and paste the URL which I just copied and press OK. Say done and say save this expense. So now this expense is saved, but we can't see the expenses. So let's create a page to see these expenses. So let's go back to my backend. And in the backend, I'm going to create a new page, and I'm going to call it create from scratch, and I'm going to call this expenses. Create that. All right. So on this page, I think for easy readability, it makes more sense to present this in a tabular format. So I'm going to use a table blocks. So choose browse blocks, choose table. I am going to choose my spreadsheet. And what I'm going to do is just going to call this all expenses. So the user knows that these are all the expenses. One thing what I'm going to do is since we already created a page for creating a new uh, expense or a new record, I am going to remove this new record from here. So let's do avoid creating new records, but you can edit a record and you can delete a record. So we'll keep those two on there. Another thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a few changes out here. First thing is we don't need to, well, I keep the user ID on for now. So you see that this is only for this specific user when they kind of log in. But I'm going to change or make this into an image field. So you see the image. We're going to change the category is fine. The payment is fine. The amount is fine. The description is fine. date is fine. I think that's all good. And the other thing what and then we basically have to have a create field or a create page or edit page for that matter to change any of this existing content. But before we do that, let me make sure that it filters and only shows information for this specific user. Okay. So if I just save it without defining that information for this specific user to be showed, it's going to show everyone's data. So let's just save this. Let me go back to the UI content and let me refresh this page. You'll see that two pages now: expenses, create page, expenses. Go to expenses. You will see everybody's information or everybody's record, but we want to show any information for this specific user. I'll show you how to do that. So let's go back to backend. Now in the backend, select filters out here, choose hidden filters, choose add, choose user ID because that's the column in our table, equals, and it should match the user ID which is in the user ID or basically user table of Frontly. So click user and choose ID. And now let's just save this. Let's go back to this page and refresh. Now you will see that you can only see the rows related to this specific user, and you can see this is the last one which we just created: insurance, credit card, paid pet insurance, and the date. Okay, so let's go back to the backend, and now let's work on the new page, or basically the edit screen to update an existing record. So what I'm going to do, I prefer to use a full page. So I'm going to choose full page, and I'm going to choose custom view because that gives me more options to kind of like show data and also allow better ways to kind of like update data. So I'm just going to say edit detail view, and we get into the edit screen for editing that specific record. So I'm going to first create a layout block because I'm going to make this into two specific columns. Choose that. And in the first column, I'm going to add a form. And this form is going to be associated with the expenses table. And the row ID will be the parent record ID. So because the form needs to know which record to edit, so it's going to be parent record form ID. I'm going to make this a grid view or grid layout, and I'm going to make a few modifications to this now. So I'm just going to call this edit expense. And I am going to add an image block over here. You know what? Let me before doing that, let's just update these fields. So we don't need to show the user ID to the user. So I'm just going to hide this. Category is going to be select again. So you can choose the existing fields. The payment method is going to be select again. And then the amount is going to be input, and the validation is going to be number. And what we're going to say is these use numbers and avoid symbols. All right. Avoid symbols. Right. We're good. We're good there. And then for the date, make sure you choose the date field. And invoice image, we're going to hide because I'm going to show you a different way of presenting this. It makes it, you know what? No, I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to, because I want the user to be able to edit this image. So I'm going to choose image, and this is fine. Frontly ID is fine. Date description, all good. The other thing what I would change is save changes is fine. The button text is fine. So I'm going to add an image block out here. Okay. And for this image block, I am going to choose a URL. And in the URL, I'm going to choose parent record invoice image. So when the user selects a specific record, that specific record image is going to get displayed out here. So the other change I would make is make this into contain so you can see the image a little bit better. So save that. Let's go back to the preview view of the user. Let me refresh this page, and you are on the screen with all expenses. Let's just click second one. Okay. So you see, we get into edit expense, food, cash, the dollar amount, team breakfast, the date, and you can change the image out here. So you can make these changes. So say what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this team lunch. Okay. And I'm just going to change the date to say 11th. I'm not going to change the image. You can change the image. And I'm just going to save the changes. Oops. Remember, we have to make sure that we avoid using symbols. So just remove that symbol. I'm just going to, since I'm modifying this, let's make this 90, 95, 50. Okay, let's save the changes. And now if you go back to all records, you probably won't see it right away. You just need to refresh the page and you should see the changes now. So we get team launch 95.50, all good. Okay, that's how you would basically edit an existing record from the list of record which is presented to the users. Okay, so you can just go to a specific record, make the changes,